Welcome to the Branding Room Only podcast, where we share career stories, strategies, and lessons learned on how industry leaders and influencers have built their personal brands. Now, let's get started with the show. Hi, everybody. It's Paula Egger, your host of Branding Room Only, and I'm so excited to have a conversation today with my guest, Tracy LaLonde. She's the founder of Joy Cheever, LLC, and author of Trust Me, The Insider's Guide to Being the Go-To Person at Work. Harnessing over 3 decades of nitty-gritty business experience into actionable insights, Tracy LaLonde thrives on helping professionals and businesses perform at their peak. Empowering professionals to build meaningful client relationships, manage with impact, boost revenue, and enhance workforce engagement has been at the heart of her work. Through Joy Cheever, she zeroes in on her primary passions: cultivating work environments where trust is the foundation, people management excels, and personal joy isn't just an afterthought, but a primary goal. You know, I love all of that. Tracy, welcome to the Branding Room.
Hello. Thank you, Paula. I'm so glad to be here.
Same. So before we even get started with the question I always ask everyone, I need to tell you. So for 2024, my word of the year is joy. So this feels like a wonderful, like the summary of me starting with joy and ending with joy and having continuous joy. And so I'm glad of that. I think that joy should be our primary goal. So there's that. That's my one offshoot before I ask you a very important question. Tracy, what does personal branding mean to you?
Yeah, in its simplest form, it's how others perceive you. Mm-hmm. And what I love about it is that it's completely within my control. Mm-hmm. So I get to determine how I want to come to you in order for you to perceive me. And that's what I think is super powerful and a point I think sometimes people miss.
A lot of times people miss. Hence this podcast. So speaking of that then, how would you describe yourself in 3 words or short phrases?
Well, like you, with joy, I'm definitely a joy seeker for sure. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so critical to me. I've tattooed it. It's my number one value in life. And so It's a visual reminder on my body because we can tend to work. So have to remind myself, joy. Second is creator. Mm-hmm. I love to build things. I love to create things. And third is excellence. I set a really high bar for myself in that process. And so those are my 3 descriptors.
Those are really strong. Those are great, strong words. And I love that. And as my listeners always know, I say excellence is at the core of every good brand. So you hit it right out of the park on that one. All right. So do you have a favorite quote or mantra?
Yeah, lately, because my life has been revolving around trust, and I know we'll talk more about that later, but I have been sharing a quote by Warren Buffett, mm-hmm. where he says, trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody notices. When it's absent, everybody notices.
Oh, wow. That's a great quote. Wow.
Right? That's the exact same reaction I had. Because I very rarely remember quotes long enough, but this one, it's just stuck with me and is so powerful and poignant.
It is so powerful. And I'm sure everybody just went to a place where they didn't feel it. Right? Right? Where it's like, oh, yeah. Sorry, y'all, for that trauma moment, but I get it. I think it's a really, really clear. You can feel that one. Yeah, that's a good one.
Paul, I think it speaks to how important we all believe it is, yet how often we take it for granted.
Yeah, like air. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes. Like we literally need it. So,
yeah.
I recall when I was in college, it was the first time I ever did anything with mindfulness. They weren't even calling it mindfulness back then. It was a yoga class we had to take. And I always said, like Black people don't do yoga. That's a lie. I'm just saying that's what I said. I know that that's not true. Don't come after me. Back then, that's what I thought. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And so they were like, you don't have to do any of the things. We just want you to breathe. Mm-hmm. And the woman who was facilitating, she was saying, we breathe all the time, but no one pays attention to it. She's like, this is an opportunity to pay attention to the breath. And it stuck with me for all these years since, in that when we actually take a moment, we realize just how powerful the functioning and how powerful breathing is for us. Like the air we breathe, literally. Okay, moving on to my next question is this. Do you have a hype song? And this is when they're going to get full Tracy. You're about to present full Tracy. What's playing in the background music that we don't get to hear? Or if you're having a terrible day, which song you're playing? And it could be the same song or different songs.
I have two.
Okay.
And they hype in different ways.
Okay. I love
the
it.
more kind of motivational, inspirational, speaks to my soul song is the song Unwritten by Natasha Bedingfield.
Yes.
Just like, and it usually brings me to tears in some way, shape, or form. But I'm a potential junkie by nature. Like I believe in others' potentials, and just the potential junkie nature of that song. Like we can all do this. It's all unwritten. You just have to open the kind of thing. So that's one. But then the fun, like energy song. And I've discovered this song recently. And if folks are EDM listeners, maybe they know it, and I'm just new to the space. Is called, not surprisingly, Happy People by a group called Eats Everything with Steve Aoki in it.
Okay, and that'll be a new one for me. Again, at the culmination of the year, we put together a full playlist of everybody's songs.
Cool. Love it. Great.
On there. All right, so tell me, how did Tracy become Tracy? So where did you grow up and how do you think that shaped you?
I grew up in a small town southwest of Chicago, Illinois. And maybe it says small town because as I was thinking about this, I was like, is it so much where I grew up or is it more about how I grew up? But I think a couple of things that were really influential in my life. One is I'm an only child. And I was a precocious only child very, very early on. And secondly, I was really tall when I was a kid. So I was 5'6" in the 7th grade. I was the tallest person in my entire class. So, every 7th grade dance was a struggle because I was taller than every boy in there in the room. But I think why those two relate to me and how I think it influenced me is it's along the line of this idea of creator. I've always been putting myself out there. So when I was a kid, I was an only child, so I had to put myself out there with friends, or I had my imaginary friends in my home that I played with and had conversations with. I was also, the tallest. I was literally, I remember in 3rd grade, I was taller than my teacher.
Wow.
So I've always been kind of out there. And that's who I am as an entrepreneur too. And I do public speaking for a living. So I'm out there, I'm always putting myself out there, which large majority of the time is a really pleasurable experience. But there are certainly those other times where when the confidence lessens, where you just put yourself out there for people to make comments to or criticize or not agree with you or what have you. So I've developed a thick skin along the way with that because I think you kind of have to when you're the kind of person who just keeps striving for something different, new, better, whatever.
100%. I think, first of all, 7th grade children are evil. And I say that as somebody who has one in 7th grade right now.
Well, and we were in 7th grade before there was phones and social media, and all that craziness.
Correct. Having had 2 kids have gone through and are going through 7th grade right now, I'm like, I'm not a fan of 6th or 7th grade. Middle school is kind of terrible. So there's that. Interesting. I didn't have that experience, but I have something in common with you. I was also the tallest person in my middle school, but I am and have been 5'2" since then. I've been 5'2" my entire life. I was tallest in there. And so I hear that. And I also hear that it's developing a thick skin also takes a lot of trauma to get there, right? Like there's a lot of pain in that thick skin developing, but it does help you to navigate the world a bit differently than others because your authentic space is the only space you have, right? I think there's some folks who are like, oh, well, I can hide amongst others, but when you literally stand out, then, that part, I get that. Okay, so we talked about you growing up, and actually, give me a shout out to the town you actually grew up in.
It's called Minooka.
Okay. So after Minooka, you left there, and then tell me about your path from school, college, into doing what you're doing now.
So Minooka at the time was a town of 3,500 people. So I was standing out a lot. So I wanted to go to a university where I had an endless sea of people to meet, and not everybody knew my business by the time I went to bed at night. And so I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana. And then my career evolved where actually my very first job was as a sorority consultant for my sorority.
Oh, okay.
Putting yourself out there again. So I traveled for a year, and I wish I could have kept count of all the cities, but I traveled 8 weeks at a time, and then I had like 2 weeks off. And so I did that for rotations, visiting the various universities. And that's how I learned how to deal with people of all kinds, all ages.
I'm sure.
And then from there, I rolled into training and development positions. So I first worked in the high-tech consulting space, and then had my first PD job in a law firm in 2000. So I followed my passion around public speaking because that's my most joyous strength. And that was my beacon that guided me through most of my career choices.
Yeah, I love that. First of all, I totally get, even though I'm from New York City, I'm from Brooklyn. I'm in a place where there's a bunch of people. I went to 2 public schools. I went to UMass Amherst and I went to Cal State. So it was like, I loved not standing out in those spaces, but also taking the space to be able to stand out where I wanted to be. So that was interesting. And I always tell people that I started doing PD and education work every single time I get into a new group, because it's like understanding what the challenges are, how I can make my case, and then having them hopefully be different and be better as I leave them. So I 100% hear that sorority piece being a good on-ramp into doing, people work is what we all do, right? It's the people stuff. So I love that. And now you are talking about trust. So, I'm still kind of breathtaken away about that quote that you had. Trust is such an important piece of what we navigate in the world. Why is it important in the workplace?
Yeah. It's interesting because a lot of the literature out there talks about why it's important. I mean, it is the cohesion that brings people together. It's the relationship you have externally with customers or clients. It's the relationship you have between manager and employee. So it really permeates every aspect. It's also trust in the services you provide, or that the product you're buying is going to do what it says it's going to do. So there's integrity naturally built into all of that too. And so it's fascinating because what prompted me to write the book that I have is that there's lots of resources that tell you why it's important. There are not a lot of resources out there that tell you how to be trustworthy or to develop trust. And to the extent that they're typically in the manager-employee dynamic, or there's some, with a customer or client dynamic. And flippantly, I made a comment of, if we put as much energy as we do in the legal space in particular, focusing on trust the way that we do with clients internally, like imagine the work environment that could take place. And so I wrote this book to focus on that, number one. Number two, to focus on the how to do it. And number three, to really focus on how to build trust between coworkers, between colleagues, so almost in the horizontal. Because once you know how to do it this way, then you can take it in any direction you need to.
Yeah. When I just was thinking about what you're saying, because, obviously I do a lot of work with law firms and corporate legal and house departments as well. As soon as I thought about trust, I thought about like who establishes, kind of like psychological safety, right? And that it starts at the top. And that when there's a lack of trust and when there's the disintegration of trust, it usually happens because it's been modeled or allowed, right, by the folks up top to not be the case. Yeah, welcome to my therapy session. So anyway, what are some of the practical ways that you think, if I'm sitting here listening to this podcast, I think, in talking to you, I'm like, okay, I know what trust is. Like, I know, when you don't have it, but I do think it's more of a defined thing on when you don't than what you need to do. So I would love to hear some of the things you're thinking about and what's in the book about how do you establish trust amongst folks who you are in relationship with at work?
Yeah. Well, Paula, it begins with a simple question. It's an age-old classic question is, should trust be earned or should trust be given? If we start there, and it's funny because when I ask an audience this, the majority of the hands are, it should be earned. And what people don't realize is that trust is actually a physiological phenomenon. So if I decide to extend trust to you, and it could be in small ways, I maybe trust you with something confidential, or maybe I admit I've made a mistake, or I share something personal with you, or I give you the lead on something that we're working on together.
Yeah.
What that does is that when that happens for you in your brain, it releases oxytocin. So it goes, which is the love or bonding hormone.
Yes, I like this.
Right. Yeah. And then it incents you to trust me in return, which then releases oxytocin for me.
Yeah.
And so it gets this reciprocal physiological thing going on that we can build up over time. And so just even answering that question of should it be earned or should it be given? It's like, if you start with the giving, it will take on an earned environment. But if you believe it should be earned and the other person has to do something in order to earn your trust, we prevent that physiological phenomenon from even happening. And it becomes just much harder and more complex and often elusive.
I would say for most lawyers who I know, the answer is immediately, you got to earn it. And the folks who stand out and, and connecting this back to brand and folks who people love, it's because they're giving it first, right? I'm going to tell you something about myself that I wouldn't normally share. I'm going to, example, I was at a conference recently and there was somebody who was a new speaker and she was like, I really hate this. I don't like picking your brain, et cetera, but I would love if you would share like a few things that you would never do again as a speaker, right? And I was like, what? I'm not only going to tell you a few things I would ever do, I'm going to tell you what you need to do right now, right? And here are all those things. And to your point, I could feel it. I could feel us bonding. Like I could feel the connection happening. But we in the legal profession do not like risk. And we don't, right? And we're not necessarily known for our vulnerability and our empathy either. And so I think that this book is going to be such a powerful game changer because of that, allowing it to be looked at as a strength, right? And as a business imperative that folks can get something out of. Because if I trust you and we start to build that joy, love, then I'm staying.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and vulnerability, in order for trust to work, vulnerability is a mandate. And I say to people like, I'm not going to give you my account numbers to my bank accounts. Like, I'm not going to start there, but I can start with little things I can trust you with, more safe things, if you will, that don't feel quite so risky. Because the other thing that happens is if I choose to take the risk and extend trust to you, but you don't extend it back to me, I stop. Because I'm like, why am I taking this risk when it's not being returned?
That's so true. One of my audience knows I have a lot of Paula's pet peeves, but one of my pet peeves is this. I consider myself a vault. I have so many secrets that live inside of me, and I sign an NDA probably 3 times a day. So I am living with a lot of information. So when somebody says to me, don't tell anybody this, right? And they're telling me that, I'm like, hello, literally what I do for a living is not tell anybody stuff, but it reminds me that there's a conditional trust, right? It's like, I'm taking a risk in order to share, but I'm scared because I've been burned before, right? Or I don't want to be burned going forward. But it always peeves me because I'm like, what have I done to not show you that? But I know it's not about me.
No. Yeah. Absolutely. It's there.
Again, my therapy session. So would you say who is going to benefit the most from the trust discussion in this book?
Everyone. It's just everyone. Yes. Even those folks who believe themselves to be very trust-inducing or trustworthy or things like that, because we all have blind spots. Another thing I talk about are the pitfalls that erode trust. So there might be inadvertent things that we do, small things on a daily basis that we don't realize are eroding trust with someone. So for example, maybe one of the things I call it the sea of endless corrections. This is different from micromanaging, because by the way, that is definitely a trust eroder.
Yeah.
But it's the sea of endless corrections in the spirit of getting it right. So, if you and I are working on something together and I'm just kind of nitpicking, or I'm putting a lot of red lines in, but it's in the spirit of creating a great product because we're both excellence oriented. If I do that once, you're probably like, okay, fine. If I continuously do that, over time, you're like, I'm not working with her anymore. Like, it feels really terrible because she doesn't trust that I can create good quality. She doesn't trust that she can have a conversation with me. Clearly, she's looking for something different with all these corrections. And it feels like she's looking for what's wrong rather than looking for what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Another one I call the disappearing act.
Okay.
So we're working together and I say, oh, you know what? Come to me anytime when you have questions. But then you can't reach me. I'm non-responsive. You have to nag me. I'm always seemingly too busy, so you don't want to bother me. So there's all these little things that we do, because trust it's I forget exactly what the old phrase is. It takes forever to build and set moments to break down.
Yep.
Because it happens in all these small little ways. And so I truly think everybody can benefit from the book. And the book can be taken in a bunch of different ways. I crafted it from the perspective of how an individual can get ahead in their careers, that's the orientation. But businesses, firms, cultures that want to improve trust and teach their team members how to be more trusting and trustworthy and trust-inducing, the book is going to be great for that too.
I mean, I love it because I can actually already see in my mind, like you presenting at firms and talking about some things that I've seen where trust is eroded. So in case there's not in the book, I'm going to give you a couple that I think that I see all the time. Trust is eroded. One of them is I send you an email and I don't know if you got that email and you have not said any. Yes. You said nothing. As a core, I don't trust the internet. So I don't know if you got the email or not. And all I want is for you to say, thanks, got it. I'm going to revert back in X time or ask you a question. I'm going to stop by. But one of the places that I see the generational challenges in the workplace and the lack of trust on both sides is that folks who are Gen X and above want to know you got that email. And folks who are in generations younger are like, I got it.
Right. Why do I need to tell you?
And I'm like, it just takes one little thing to just make it a little bit better because what we like is accountability. So if I then know that you have it, then I can say like, hey, XYZ thing, or you can say, hey, XYZ thing. So that is a big trust eroder that looks like a small thing. The other thing is 2 minutes late. It's like, do you know what I can never get back? Oh, that's right. It's time. So when you waste my time or don't honor my time, that is an erosion. And I've seen it happen. There was a leader that I worked with years ago who was consistently, so much so that the team would say, this is the time, but they would all show up at the same late time because they knew that they were not going to be there. And it's like, people were adopting, but that was not, they didn't trust you. Like you weren't going to be there the time that you said. And that was, you were part of a 360. And it was like, everybody said, she doesn't respond to my time. She doesn't respect my time. Yeah. So I can imagine the conversations that are going to.
Right. Well, there's another one. This has a little bit of a colorful descriptor, but it's called an ask-all. If someone asks you for your opinion or perspective and you give it to them and they continuously ignore it or they do the opposite, drives me crazy.
Oh, I'm going to start using that with my mentoring relationships. Don't be an asshole, please. Yeah. Again, trust. Again, there's definitely a lot of different ways that this can go. So was it just that you were seeing all these things when you were presenting and facilitating, and then you were like, I have to write this book because the Lord needs this, the world needs this, everybody needs this?
Truly, I mean, because I even noticed in my own materials that I was saying how important trust was, but I wasn't even doing the deep dive. And candidly, it spawned a presentation first. The presentation came before the book did. But then after I'd done the presentation, I thought, gosh, I have more to say. I have more to say, but a keynote is typically only an hour. So what else do I want to say? And with the help of AI as a brainstorming partner and editor, I wrote the book because I had the starter dough from the presentation in 3 days. It just was one of those birthing moments where it just came out.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I need a moment. As somebody who's in the process of putting together a book proposal, I'm like, I love that because I feel like this is the third child that I am having. And so I'm just like, if there's not labor, but that is a really great way of thinking about how to help with the ideation and kind of pulling stuff together. So I love that. And I love that you were able to get it to market faster because of the fact that you had I love it. I love it so much.
Yeah. Well, and remind me, Paula, have you written other books before?
I have not. No, this is going to be my first book ever. Yeah, 100%. I would be.
because, because what you may find, at least has been my experience, because it's my second book,
Yeah.
is that the writing of the book
Mhm.
is somewhat the easiest part.
Mhm.
It's all the
Really?
editing and formatting and marketing and
Yeah.
positioning and like all the stuff that comes after that. That's like,
Yeah.
oh, I
Hello?
write it and it's out there. No, 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 no. So I would happily offer to be an advisor in your process.
Done. Accepted. Contract
Good,
read. But
good.
yes, no, I think that I'm most excited about the marketing piece because one of the reasons I reached out to, every time I see somebody has a book, I'm like, how can I help this book elevate? Because number one, even though society is doing what it does, I do think that we are a reading society. We like to have content. And so the more that we can kind of put conversations out there that help people to think and do things better, it's better. And when I saw that you had this book, and thinking about joy and trust and what happens when you have trust and how it can bring joy, I thought a lot about what was happening societally and what is happening societally and how breakdowns of trust have led us to being in a lot of spaces that we're in. And so, I used to say when I went into firms that the walls of the workplace are porous. So anything that's happening outside comes inside whether you wanted to or not. And so we have to navigate those things. And I do think the dialogue around trusting your colleagues right now is going to be a very different one than it had been maybe 2 years ago because of what's happening. And it's much more important to realize that we can build, like it's not just a terrible thing we can do about it, right? It's that there are things that we can do about it, but that vulnerability piece that you talked about, needed, very, very, very needed.
Yeah, vulnerability and also candor and transparency.
Yes, yes.
And I know I'm speaking to the choir as I say this, I know. Absolutely. But just people are afraid to artfully express, I want people to be thoughtful and careful with it, but
Yes.
they're afraid to address the elephant in the room or, pick your metaphor.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can't have trust without being able to have candid conversations with one another.
It's so true. And in the context of not just firms, but a lot of, corporate organizations, it's people are dealing with past trauma, past action. And so when you want to not now start to build and establish trust, it kind of sometimes I think, and again, tell me if you think that I'm wrong, it requires a reset. Like if you feel like trust has been broken down, you have to say, I know what happened before, or I don't know, but I can feel it. Right? And I want it to be different as we go forward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And for
Mhm.
someone who's noticing it, it's just coming to mind because I had a coaching conversation just this morning
Yeah.
of a junior partner at a firm who's managing someone, and they're having a situation where the trust is eroding in her.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and I'm like, it's clear she's got a fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, something has happened to her. And I said, you need to open that door so
Yeah.
that she can express it. Because he keeps telling her, I've got your back. Don't worry. Go do this. Da, 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 and she's not. And I'm like, there's a key component here that isn't getting surfaced for her to be able to trust that you actually have her back.
Yeah. And usually in that case, just as what I've seen before, there's probably a mid-level associate or another, like somebody in there who is saying, actually, right? Like this connects directly to branding, right? It's what people are saying about you when you're not there that can cause the disconnect in either how people will give you that grace or they will not. And even if you're saying it, the lack of trust because there's additional information that exists out there that they are relying on, well, maybe someone who they have a better trust with already.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Ah, I love this conversation.
I know. I do like so much we can spend time talking about.
It's so true. When you I wrote down a bunch of notes. You said how trust is connected to vulnerability. And I'm thinking about career things and branding. And it also is connected to vulnerability, but aligned with authenticity too. And that that same quote about you can, whatever the quote was that we messed up, in terms of building it and it can go away with one thing. The same thing I think about often when it comes to branding, right? Like you can have a straight line, people can think really high, and then you can do one thing and and then you have to rebuild up that trust. And we see it often on the We see it in pop culture. We see it in a lot of things. Like, that's where cancel culture came from, right? Like everything was fine and then you got canceled. Now it's usually something terrible that's happened. But the point is similarly looking out for your brand by making sure that trust is a part of that calculation makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine being able to ask yourself, who can trust me?
Yeah.
And who do I trust? And
Yeah.
looking at that, I did a session on building your personal board of directors.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the key pieces of that was I wanted it to be people who you can trust to give you feedback, the feedback that you need, right? Because you can sometimes trust that someone's going to say something nice, and that's not necessarily the trust that you need. Right? You need to trust the real stuff. This is so applicable to everything. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about relationships? like actual ones. Yeah.
Personal relationships?
Yeah.
I hear you. I mean, this could be a book on marriage. Totally. Just as easily could be a book on two coworkers.
Particularly with those relationships. I'm asking about it in these senses because sometimes when I'm talking to authors about the thing, people will just take the high point, and I'm like, this is applicable to everything.
Yeah.
Like you can talk about this in so many different contexts where people can get better and they can reflect on what they've done, what they've experienced, and then endeavor to be better. And that's the same thing as branding, right? It aligns in the same way. Like it always iterates. So tell me, what do you think, coming back to branding, is something that has endured about your brand throughout your career?
Oh gosh, I think because you and I have been around the block a little bit. I know we started when we were 10, but we have
correct.
We've said a couple of words and some not to repeat them, but they're actually genuine for me. I think that the authenticity and the excellence piece
yes,
have really transcended my work over the time. What I've talked about, like what I do, has shifted because I get bored after a while and I need to find a new topic to talk about. But when you're in training and development, you're doing it for 30 plus years, you just cover a lot of ground on those kinds of things. So the what of what I do has shifted, but the how I go about it. And also really another key word for me is generosity. And so I try to be really generous with my time and energy with folks. And early on, that really helped me because I was volunteering for different boards. I was volunteering for different projects. I was taking on the things that people didn't want to do. So I'd take on the crappy stuff, do that kind of stuff. So
those are trust builders. Those are also brand and trust builders at the same time.
Right.
One of the questions that I send ahead of time and the one I ask folks all the time is like, how has leadership and volunteerism helped you? And I ask it because I don't know who I would be if I hadn't been of service to be able to then be of service, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and I love it too, because it gives you authentic ways to get to know people in a deeper way.
Exactly.
I mean, to be fully transparent with folks who are watching this, we just saw each other literally last week at a conference. Yes. And while that's fun and exciting, you and I probably had 15 minutes that we talked, if that. Right. We have surface time, we don't have deep time.
Exactly.
And so with the volunteerism, that gives you the deep moments with folks. And especially if you're doing it in a space where you're with your tribe or your industry or your sector or your people or what have you, kind of thing that enables that dynamic to happen.
Yeah. And when you see, I love that you couch that volunteerism as generosity too, because when you give of yourself, I do think, to bring it back to trust, people then trust you more, right? They are seeing that you're doing something that you don't have to do for another good, whatever that good is. And whether it's not directly for them or not, they're still seeing it.
Yeah.
And this is so powerful. Oh my gosh, you're going to have to come back. We're going to have to do like a part 2. I want to do like 6 months into what you've learned from having this book, because I'm fascinated thinking about how this is really in every single thing that we do.
Right, totally. Well, and one more thought about generosity. Please. Generosity isn't completely altruistic. It's also selfish. Like, you feel good. It literally releases endorphins within my body that give me joy. And so it's a mutually beneficial situation.
It is true. And I studied anthropology when I was an undergrad. And one of the things we had to do was like watch monkeys. And so when I tell people about their brand and how some of the things that are just physiological that we have no real control over, but that helps build trust, but also their brand is literally showing up and having a smile and making eye contact, right? Like those two things help people to be like, oh, I feel a little bit safer. Oh, I want to come a little bit closer. And so while I'm not saying, and don't take this way, I'm not saying you got to smile everywhere, because you do not. I have a scowl that I use as well. But it's so helpful to have folks feel that safety immediately to then want to delve a little bit more into that. Again, but I'm a New Yorker, so don't expect that anywhere on the subway. It's not happening. It's just not happening. So tell me about this. And I couched it in the prep questions about trust, but I mean about branding, but I want to ask you about trust. What mistakes have you seen people make when it comes to building trust?
So many. So many.
About the squirrel.
Almost the inverse of everything in the book that I say is how people made mistakes. Well, what rises to the top? First one, big one, is a lack of integrity. And my simplest definition of integrity is doing what you say you're going to do. And then add on friends when you said you're going to do it. But so many people don't do what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. It's mind-numbing to me, because integrity is a big value for me generally as well.
Yes.
So that's a big one.
Let me ask you this. Did you notice any shift post-COVID of how people perceived lack of integrity? So perceived on purpose twice. Right? Yeah. Any shift there? Because I'm just thinking about, we are different people post-COVID, right? And that we had an experience that was traumatic as a collective. And we also are dealing with that trauma still. So that sometimes what is perceived as us not doing what we say we're going to do when we're going to do it is not necessarily about lack of integrity, but lack of capacity or any other thing.
Yeah.
Have you noticed a shift in the conversation at all?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I'm going to attribute it to a lack of communication.
100%.
Right? It's in the simplest part of actually communicating with each other, weirdly, even though there's so much more technology now, has become so much more challenging.
Yeah.
We have to be much more intentional about it, because we cannot rely on seeing each other in the office like we did, which always baffles me when businesses who have multiple offices around a geographic region, around the world, when they get all up in arms about having people come back in the office. I'm like, wait a minute, you have 52 other offices everywhere and you have great working relationships. So I don't know why we can't transplant those same skills into the people that we are co-located with geographically. And I will offer to you, I think, and I'm not blaming generational differences, but I think the generational differences in the way we communicate is hampering in that both sides are a little bit rigid and inflexible in meeting the others where they are and what their preferences are.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you said that, because I've been thinking this whole time, because we've mentioned generations a couple of times already in the conversation, that number one, I want to relink Chris DeSantis's podcast in here as well, because at the crux of that, even though we didn't necessarily elevate it, was trust, is that there's a lack of trust down and up. And that's what I sort of surfaced in the beginning of our dialogue. But what just came to me when you said that about communication, I wrote it down because I was like, I have to make sure we get this point, is passive aggression. That is a trust eroder.
Absolutely.
That is a trust. Yeah. I could see you doing content every week on what erodes trust. And passive aggression means that you don't trust me enough to tell me directly what I need to know for us to collaborate better. Yeah. And you think that, and it can be couched in what folks are saying are niceness. And I always say it is not kind to be passive aggressive. Perfect. And it erodes. Oh my gosh. I'm just sitting in the past trauma. Like, I just can't. It's another Paula's pet peeve. See episode 7. It is definitely all of that. I cannot wait for this podcast episode to come out because I'm going to be like everybody. I bring Tracy into everywhere you work because this is the dialogue that needs to happen now, like more than ever. How we get to a point of trust each other in a society where we have so much that we harp on that's different. I think when we move towards a trust practice, and I don't know if that, I'll make it up. If that's not a thing, take it. You have that. It is yours. We move towards that as a thing, then we get better as peopling, like the down to the humanity of us, versus talking about what is separating us. Now, that being said, there's a lot of other things, a lot of headwinds against that trust.
Yeah.
There's a lot of headwinds against that trust, but I think this is a powerful. So,
well, and one other thought for you in thinking about it is when a team, a business unit, a business realize that they're lacking in trust. Like, for example, I had a team hire me to come in and speak with them. Yeah. And the leader was like, well, can you come fix this?
Oh.
And I had to say over and over again, like, this is not going to be a fix. This is going to be an opening of the door. And it's going to give you language and a vernacular that you can all use to get onto the same page. And so that's what I have to caution my clients on is like, this isn't a one conversation and you're done.
Right.
Because as you and I could talk for hours and hours and hours, it's the same kind of thing, in that environment where I go and speak with folks. It's like, I'm usually given an hour. And so it's like, let's just recalibrate expectations here. It's just an opening of the door for you to actually do the real work after I'm not here, or invite me back to continue to do that work with you either way kind of thing.
Which is important. It's actually you are level setting about trust before you get into the conversation about trust, because if the expectation is that you're going to fix it, then the understanding has to be that it, again, is a practice as opposed to an answer. Right. It's not a destination. It is definitely a continuing journey when it comes to this. And similarly, like you can be off-roaded in your journey, you can do that when you do these things that are trust eroders. This is fascinating. I love this. So what do you think are some effective ways to continue to build trust for folks in relationship in any, like whatever direction you want to pull? Like, what are some things that you've seen work?
Yeah. Well, I have 6 components of trust. And so let me just list them quickly. Competence. So being good at what you do kind of thing, having the skills, continuously growing those skills, honing those skills. Openness, which is communication and transparency. Integrity. Empathy, putting yourself in the other person's positions, connecting on a human level. Empowerment, which is enabling autonomy, decision-making, demonstrating confidence in someone's capabilities and judgment. And then finally, consistency, which is doing all 5 of those things reliably. And so it's funny though, if you were to Google what are definitions of trust, and this is where I started, because that's what we do. We start a project, you Google it.
Yes.
I mean, there were so many ways that people look at trust. And I was like, I just need to, my brain's not that big. Narrow this down into things that, people can actually chew on and focus on. And so, if an individual, I'm sure, well, and the other interesting thing is people don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to be trustworthy today. Right? We don't do that.
They don't.
Maybe we should, but new mantra. However, what I encourage people is, there are the areas of those 6 where you might be already excelling naturally, but look at those areas where you maybe aren't excelling, or maybe you've gotten some feedback from others, or maybe they're challenging for you, and pick one and work on one for the month.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Another thing I ask people to do is to think about these 6 and also write down, I call them their trust musts.
Come on, rhyming.
No, I can't help it. It's the opposite side of a pet peeve. I want to be positive about it. So, because we all have our trust musts. You and I are very aligned on being on time.
Yep.
And being on time, probably for you too, is late in my book. And so jotting down, having clarity, self-clarity around what your own trust musts are, number 1, literally writing down. And then number two, sharing them with the people that you work with most often, or the people you share life with, most often, because they're not bad. They just are. And if others don't know about them, they're going to continue to mismanage expectations and run against them. And so that's another way that I encourage people to look at those kind of pillars of trust and to leverage them for the good.
I love those pillars of trust because they align very well with branding. Right?
Yeah, right.
If you're not competent and have excellence, you're not having a good brand. If you're not vulnerable and have a little, think about authenticity with openness, it's not going to work well. If you don't have integrity, nothing works well if you don't have integrity in my mind. So there's that. Empathy, I think that's a place where people don't necessarily think about it in terms of branding, but empathetic leaders are leaders that are stronger leaders and people want to follow. So there's that. Empowerment, right? It can't be your brand alone. It's got to be how you're going to navigate and continue so your team. And then what was the last one? Consistency. I mean, that's just that's in a nutshell. It's like when you hit your stride. So I love that they dovetail so well together because it's so true. And it reminds me of when I do presentations, I always talk about like people often don't love to talk about personal branding as a thing. They're like, oh, it's too commercial and I'm not a product and et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, all right, okay, relax. So I, a part of one of my speaking musts, in my writer says I have to have a can of Coca-Cola and a glass of ice when I'm presenting, period. It's not a bottle, a can, and I need that. So that's right. And I grab that can and I go, whether or not you like soda or not, I don't care about your health plan. I don't care. But I love Coca-Cola. And when I have Coca-Cola, I know what it looks like. I know what it tastes like, and I know what I can expect when I drink it. And that is the brand that, right? What do people expect from you? How are you going to show up? What's going to be your excellent product? How am I going to think about you after I finish this can? That is how I dovetail those things. And it's a similar thing is like, like if somebody put, in a glass and it was insert other brand here. Yeah. Like, first of all, I know this is not Coca-Cola because I know what to expect. And it's similar thing. Like when you trust somebody, that consistency is such a big piece of it, which gives you a benefit, I think, that, I recall a mentor telling me years ago, I showed up badly at an event. I was in a meeting and I showed up in a way that was not normal, typical Pollyanna, as they call me. And my mentor said after the meeting, she grabbed me and was like, what's going on? And I say that she could trust how consistent I had been before then to know that something was wrong in that instance because that's not how I normally show up. And that's also a sign of having a strong brand is that when you have a bump, which we all are human, then they're going to question whether the outside thing is not the you thing is and how it's impacting you. I love this.
They'll give you the benefit of the doubt and mark it as an anomaly.
Exactly. And I find that when you think about how you bring this trust conversation to firms and other organizations, the place that I see trust showing up in a way that can be challenging is because of the way bias is, there can be a trust because of affinity, right? That just happens. And a lack of trust when there's not affinity, right? And that can be gender, race, that can be a lot of other things. And the folks who are working on their trust practice, which I do have to use that, it's understanding that areas of difference can be opportunities for trust as opposed to, places that trust needs to be eroded because it doesn't have to be the case. I think that there is a lot of places that we can continue to build more trust because there's more similarities than there are the differences that we perceive. So, yeah. I am so sold on this. I haven't even read the book yet, but I am so sold. Wait till it's going to be a whole thing. I'm going to be like, and then Tracy said, so
I appreciate you.
No, I think that this is a powerful thing, and everybody who's listening, I always tell y'all what to do, but this is so impactful in so many different areas, and all we have, I think, is our integrity, and all we can really think about is how we want to show up and how we want folks to show up for us, and that trust is at the crux of that, and so we need to be doing this better. So I knew this conversation was going to go fast, which is why I already told you that you have to come back in 6 months to talk about it. So there's that. But I'm going to ask you two questions that I ask everybody. And I think you already answered the first one, but I'll ask you anyway. Wait, before I do that, I have to ask you one more question. What do you do for fun?
I travel That's my big, and I mean, my daily fun is I'm an exerciser. I love to get outside. I live in Miami, Florida for a reason because
Yeah,
it's nice year round here. But my big love is traveling
I
because I'm
love it.
super curious and want to experience other things. And my husband happens to be European, born and
Mhm.
raised, and so
Yeah.
we have family still back there, and that just is a springboard for going lots of other places.
I love that. I love that. And it's also my fun alignment too. I'm like, I just want to be on an airplane. Please
Yeah.
take me someplace new. Okay, so back to the two questions. The first question I ask everybody on the podcast is this. So what is a authentic aspect of your personal brand that you will never compromise on?
It's that excellence is just it's the core of who I am, and not in a way that makes me better than others. That's
Right.
not the intention. It's just
Mhm.
if I'm going to do something,
Yeah.
I'm going to do it to the best of my ability,
Mhm.
no
Mhm.
matter what it is. Whether it's I'm cleaning out the closet, which I hate, but I'm not going to be. And I'm also super driven. I'm super
Mhm.
goal oriented, so I'm going to clean that closet out better than anybody's ever cleaned that closet. That's what I'm going to do.
I love that. I knew it was, I wrote down two things. I was like, it's either going to be excellence or integrity. I knew that. For me, I like to grab from the conversation what I think it's going to be. It could have been also joy too, which I
Very
would have
much.
also
Yeah,
loved as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
All
So
right.
with
So
joy's just so part of it. It's like, huh, okay, it's
yeah.
joy. But
Yes.
the excellence I've had, there's therapy around the excellence too, because there are times I'm a
Mhm.
perfectionist.
Yeah.
I've worked, that's a therapy, that's long time therapy, because there are those moments of does everything need to be, at what level does everything need to be kind of thing. So
Yes. Yes.
there's a
Progress
person.
over perfection. Progress over perfection always. Excellence is always the goal. Perfection is a standard we cannot keep. I'm like, I say it at home. I say it whenever. I say it all the time. And it's a lot of things, particularly women, have that can hold us back. But I also get it as a goal. Excellence is always a goal. It always should be the goal. Okay, so branding room only is a play on the term standing room only because, as everyone knows, I say I am clever. So, so what do you think is something that people would be in a room where there's only standing room to experience about you? What's that magic thing about you?
I think it's relatability.
Mm. Mhm.
This is the feedback that I get from people too. It's that people feel like I get it, whatever it is. So it's either the way that I'm able to listen to them,
Yeah.
or when I'm teaching or bringing content forth, the way that I make it relatable to
Mhm.
everyone in the room. And you've had these experiences too, where people ask you to come speak, and you've got the panoply of vintages
Yes.
in the room. Like, gosh, how am I going to make this point? But we do, because we have to. And that's probably now I'm like, I should have said joy instead of excellence. But with the joy is the relatability part of it. And that's just something, being a natural born teacher, of
Mhm.
trying to help people assimilate these ideas and into their own way of being, not the way I'm telling them, but they have to find their own authentic way of being that. But I think relatability is what comes to mind.
I think I agree. And as you mentioned, we haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time with each other, but I will tell you what I noticed. Again, I'm always in brand lens, always, probably to my detriment, but I'm always looking at people and thinking about who they are and how they're showing up. And I knew your face, but I hadn't like seen you talk to you. And I was like, oh, of course that's straight. Like I immediately, because just seeing you, I felt like more at ease. And so there's some people who have that without even trying. And I do think that that is a relatability that can just come across in how you look. And then again, the trust builds by it showing up and being that way. And I'm so happy that we were able to be in conversation so I can actually see it show up and be that way. So I want to thank you so much for being a guest on my podcast
Thank
and
you.
talking about trust and joy and excellence and all the good things. And you have an open invitation to come back whenever you would like to talk
Yeah.
about anything you want. How can people find out more about you and what you do and how you add value? We're going to link the book so they'll be able to get that.
Okay, great. Yeah. Two places. The best place is my website, joycheever.com. And then I do post a fair amount on LinkedIn. So that's where folks usually pick up my stuff.
Awesome. We'll put all of those in the show notes. Everybody, go tell a friend that they need to trust you, that they need to read this book and listen to this podcast. Share it with anybody and share it with everybody, especially the ones you know are not doing well in that space. Let me be the one to tell them the things. And remember that. Stand by your brand, y'all. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.